Hey guys, what's up? My name is Vadim Storts, and I'm a lawyer at Binaryx. In this video, I'll tell you how we should read the documents for the real estate that is being tokenized, what blocks of documents exist, what these documents mean, and where you can verify them. So, let's get started. I'm turning on the screen share. Just a minute. Alright, let me adjust all the windows. Alright, let's go. We are on the Binaryx website. Let's check out the properties that are being tokenized. There are properties that are under construction and properties that are for rent. Let's open any one, for example, the first one we find. We open the Documents section and see a large volume or a long list of documents written in different languages. We need to figure out how to understand all of this. The first thing we need to understand, and this is what the first block of documents talks about, is how the token I purchased as an investor confirms my right to the real estate that the platform is positioning. For example, let's take the Karolov property. So, it says here, buy tokens and you will become an owner. How can this be verified through the documents? You need to understand one thing: the investor does not directly own the property rights. The investor holds corporate rights to a legal entity, and that legal entity owns 100% of the real estate located in various locations around the world. This is a very important point. If I, as an investor, buy any token, I become a partner of the legal entity. This legal entity, which includes me as a partner along with, for example, 100, 200, or 300 other people, we all come together in one pool. We all become partners of this legal entity, and then the legal entity directly purchases the real estate. But to become a partner of this legal entity, it must, I'm referring to this company, meet certain criteria. 1, 2, 3. This company must meet certain requirements. Whether this company meets these requirements or not, we will check all of this now. First, we see a name here like Dow LSE Referral. It directly states that there is a legal entity LSE, which is a limited mobility company, a limited liability company. Why is Dow mentioned here? Dow is a specific organizational and legal form of a legal entity that is registered under the laws of the state of Wyoming in the USA, which states that a limited liability company can be managed algorithmically. In short, this needs to be cut out. The legal entity can be managed through a smart contract, and the smart contract directly issues tokens. We need to understand that if we buy a token, this token corresponds specifically to this legal entity because this legal entity is the direct owner of the real estate. In other words, if we bought a token, we need to understand how this token and the smart contract that issued these tokens are directly linked to this legal entity. And now we will look at all of this to understand, for example, the tokens that are being offered to us. There is a link to the smart contract. For instance, we click on this link. What do we see here? We see the holder. Yes, there are 191 holders. We see all the operations, transactions, like a bank statement, and we see the number of the smart contract itself. We click on this link because this is Polygon Scan. It's the Polygon blockchain. Based on this blockchain, the technical release of tokens has been made, which has its own smart contract. This number cannot be changed, so we accept it as it is, which is essentially unchangeable. We just cut this part out. Here we see the number of the smart contract. What do we do next? We go into the legal entity. In other words, what we have in the documents is this. A statement from the registry, yes, that this company is registered. This statement mentions that there is Binaryx Bali Asset Affordable LLC, which is the company that directly owns the property in Bali. And you, as people or as investors who have acquired the token of the property, become co-owners of this company. And what does this mean? Here we see, for example, in section 6, yes, public and defined. So we see this same smart contract, which is here, yes, 83,033.83C033. This same smart contract is outlined in the company registration statement, article of organization. Well, from a legal perspective in English, the article of organization is the company's charter. And in this company charter, according to the laws of the state of Wyoming, it states that the smart contract, the company's registration address, the company name, and other provisions required by law must be specified. In other words, the smart contract is mentioned here, as we can see. We can see the original company number here, the registration date here, and the name. But you could say, or for example, I love to proofread documents. And I could say, well, maybe someone forged this document. Right. Okay, forged. Let's look further. Here we have a link to verify that this company is indeed registered. Let's go. Where do we end up? We land on the state of Wyoming's website, where all companies are registered. And now I'll show you how to check all of this. Look, the same original number, we have 9476. Let's open it again. 9476, the original company number. The link shows that the company is also registered and has an active status. And how can we, perhaps, for example, simply check the next document? I'm moving myself over here. We open the document attached on the government website, and we basically see the same thing. Original number 9476, when the company name was registered, registration address. The smart contract is the same, 83SC033. You might ask, what is this address, right, in this company? According to the laws of the state of Wyoming, when registering a legal entity, specifically a Dow LLC, there must be a registered agent. And now we are getting to all of this. So there is this Robin Jones, right? This is the agent who has his, well, roughly speaking, provides such services for registering legal entities in the state of Wyoming. He provides his address. This address is needed for any correspondence to be sent there. This address is needed so that we or other companies can register with the LLC, and he provides such services. He signs the documents. He is authorized specifically to sign and submit documents. This person has no other powers. Moving on, here are the forms that he submitted. His consent that the address will be registered as such, and such a certificate is issued. State of Wyoming. This states that the company was registered on a certain date at a certain time. That's it, the Secretary of State signed. So these are the documents. We pulled this from the state of Wyoming's website. And where do we have the same document attached? Right on the website. We attach it there as well. 1, 2, 3 for point 5. So you understand we have a registered legal entity. To confirm the registration, we go to the state website of Wyoming, where there is a section about the registration of all companies. And this way we understand that this company, this legal entity, is indeed registered. Another way to check this, let me explain this in detail, I'll just show you, step by step, because we're only pulling the link. Look here carefully and thoroughly. We can just go here to the state of Wyoming. We simply enter the original number and do some research to see if such a company is really registered or not. Yes, it is indeed registered. The same information appears as in the links. So this is basically what we expected. What do we do next? Why do we need this information, and how can we use it further? Look, when we understand that the legal entity that issued the tokens, and this is confirmed by the fact that we went to the Wyoming State website, where we check that this company is registered. We see that on the page of the object itself, a registration certificate of the company is attached. So to speak, we basically verified its identity by downloading the form itself, and anyone can download it. No access or keys are needed, by the way. You just go to the link, download it, and you can store it somewhere. But I would recommend doing this for the reason that if you become an investor in any project, any investment, you should have all the documents that confirm your participation in various investment relationships. So let's move on. What else do we see here? Besides what I mentioned, yes, we see the company's name, the identification number of this company, when it was registered, the address of the registered agent, and the smart contract itself. In other words, we understand that the tokens we are buying are directly tied to this legal entity through the smart contract. And we also see some additional, let's say, information. For example, if you look here, there are 17.3.11.4 in the UN law. This is about the fact that if you look here, there are phrases like 31, 104, and 1731, 106b, which are in the law. This is in addition to the law on the creation of legal entities, including the creation of Dow LLC, which explains what information must be included in this informational statement, or article of organization, and it indeed talks about how it is fully managed. If you read it, and it describes that yes, indeed, it is truly and completely managed in a decentralized manner and definitely algorithmically governed through the aforementioned smart contract mentioned here. This is another confirmation that this smart contract or legal entity is managed by those people who directly acquired the tokens. Next, we look at the additional article which describes some people like Kurchenko, Lek, for example, Fedosov, Andrei. We're talking about the fact that for a legal entity to be able to buy, yes, in the real world, to somehow purchase a real estate object, someone has to sign some kind of dollar purchase agreement, probably with the seller. Well, I think that's logically clear, and here we describe our two founders who have such powers. A certain power of attorney is issued to them from this legal entity, meaning after the acquisition of real estate, these, let's say, authorized persons can change. That is, the partners who own 100% of WLC, for example, me and another 100 or 300 people, we can vote and decide to change these authorized persons if we don't like them, for instance, to someone else's powers. But I'll talk about that a bit later. In other words, we discussed that there is a legal entity, and this legal entity has a smart contract that manages it. This legal entity has a registration confirmation on the state of Wyoming's website. And we see that the information attached to the page of the real estate object is confirmed and identical to that which is in the state registry of Wyoming. Next, we see the following documents. Operation Agreement. What is this document and why is it needed here? There are 14 pages, a lot of content in English, but I'll explain to you what this document is generally for. Because the investor who invests in the real estate understands that they are becoming a partner in the legal entity. But what can I do there? What are my rights? What are my obligations? Do I have any liability if there are debts in this legal entity? How will I manage this legal entity with people, with strangers? There are 300 investors, and they could be from all over the world. And how I communicate with them. This is exactly what the operation agreement is for, and it is a legal requirement for creating a DAO LLC in the state of Wyoming to have such an operation agreement. This is the company's operating agreement, meaning it's an agreement between the partners. It's not the kind of contract where each partner signs it. In other words, if you just buy a token and it states in this operation agreement that by purchasing the token, you automatically agree to the terms of this operating agreement. So it needs to be read and thoroughly understood. Since I prepared it, I can literally tell you the main points. It describes that there is a legal entity that directly owns the real estate. But how should this legal entity manage the real estate? In other words, it needs to authorize a person to sign the purchase agreement. The mechanism for how this is done is described here. It must make a decision, the legal entity, to sign a contract with a management company that will lease the real estate. It describes how this happens and how each investor can participate in it. It also outlines the rights, obligations, or duties of a partner who has become a partner of this DAO LLC, who holds their tokens and has certain voting rights. What does this mean? All decisions in the DAO LLC are made through voting. There are specific mechanisms for conducting these votes, which are also described here. While we look for it, I will tell you more. For example, voting. It outlines what percentage of people needs to gather in order to vote for a particular decision, how this happens, and on what platform it takes place. What happens if, for example, a decision was made or not made? What decisions can actually be made? I'll tell you more. Basically, we did everything so that people, investors who hold corporate rights to this legal entity, have the opportunity to vote for changes, for example, to vote for a new authorized person, to vote for a custodian, so to speak, the keeper of all documents, because Binaryx, on its part, performs this organizational role for registration up to the OLS. And all these documents in electronic form we just reviewed, while in paper form they may be stored in some legal company. Therefore, when the 100% object is filled and the real estate is 100% filled, the partnership and the real estate object are purchased. After that, the partners can vote to change the legal company that will store the documents, represent their interests, and directly enter into contracts. For example, the partners may decide after some time to sell this real estate. Let's say it was bought for $200,000 and it became more expensive because the market changed, and then decide and vote to sell it. But what do we need to sell it? Fair enough. We need someone to sign the sales contract on behalf of the legal entity. Therefore, the partners can vote that the authorized person will be, for example, me, or, for instance, another legal company, or an individual. Well, it's clear that in any case it will be an individual, but as a representative of some legal company. And in what form this is formalized, all of. This is described in the operation agreement, so that a person who becomes a partner of any legal entity, not just WLC, but in general any fund, any legal company, any legal entity in the world must understand what obligations they are signing up for and what rights they have regarding how they can act. For example, if they bought tokens and became a partner, how they can exit from this and how these tokens are sold. This is precisely what is detailed and outlined here. Therefore, this operational agreement needs to be read in any case, understand all the nuances, all your rights and obligations. You will know and understand all of this. And thus, from this block of documents, you can understand the following. There is a legal entity. By purchasing tokens, I become a partner of this legal entity. I have certain rights and obligations. When I am a partner of this legal entity, and this legal entity purchases a real estate property, then this real estate property is either resold at a higher price if it has appreciated, or this real estate property is simply rented out. And for this, a management company is needed, with which this legal entity WLC directly signs a contract. I will show it to you later. It is here, and therefore, by understanding this mechanism, it generally becomes easier. What do I mean by easier? That is, you understand I bought a token. There is a legal entity, and I became its partner. This legal entity directly purchased the real estate property, which it owns in the state registry, so to speak, under the right of ownership of the real estate property. And this legal entity entered into a contract with the management company, which is obligated to rent out this real estate property, and all the income generated from the rental will be transferred monthly to this legal entity DAO LLC. Since you are a partner of this legal entity, you have the right to receive income in proportion to the tokens you own. So, this is the principle of the operation agreement written in simple terms. Now, let's move on. Next, what do we see? Legal due diligence. This is a legal check. This is my part, and I really love it, because I believe that if a real estate property is subject to tokenization, or if you need to raise half the money from investors to buy it, you must thoroughly check this real estate property in each jurisdiction. The documents are called differently. If we open due diligence, we can see the documents that have been provided for review. And it says, scan copy of Hak Malik, which refers to the list of documents, meaning this is for the land. Hak Malik is the ownership right under Indonesian law. And there are many different documents here, like the cadastral number and so on. And what does this mean in order to provide investors with better solutions? Regarding a more suitable property for tokenization, we must thoroughly check it. We can only do this through a local legal company. Let me explain, because they know how to verify the authenticity of each document. In other words, if we are talking about a property for sale, what do we need to understand? If this property is standalone and located on a certain plot of land, then we need to check what? The land documents. First, the documents for the property. Second, are there any restrictions on renting out this property later? Because under Indonesian law, for example, there are zones where you can rent out property short-term, and others where you can't. In other words, we are telling investors, hey, you buy it and we will get high, let's say, rental income and fees because the property is rented out short-term. But in reality, you can't rent it out short-term there, because there are zones where short-term rentals are allowed and zones where you can only rent for a long-term, meaning for a year or more. Therefore, during the due diligence process, this legal verification and analysis of documents, all these aspects, are studied, then passed on to us. We further examine them on our side and understand whether we can proceed with this property or not. And only after that do we understand and say that this property will be tokenized. For it, we create a separate WLC in the state of Wyoming, which is linked to a smart contract that issues tokens and then is listed on our platform. Therefore, due diligence is outlined here by the parties involved. Who is the seller? Are there any restrictions on the sale? Are there possibly any legal disputes? Can they rent it out as much as we want? Well, not for rent, but there's also this point. If we talk about the legislation in Indonesia, then a foreigner or a foreign company or a non-citizen, let's say, of Indonesia cannot own real estate as we are used to, like property ownership. This point needs to be cut out. Regarding rental, where I started with the word rental, because if I start explaining the legislation in Indonesia now, I think it would be incorrect. So this document itself is directly. It states that the real estate is legally eligible for tokenization, it can be purchased, and it can be rented under the conditions offered to investors. Only after that do we receive the due diligence, all these documents are connected, and we directly make a decision and list it on the platform. This is basically why due diligence is needed. What do we see next? What do we see next? Next, we see the following documents. After that, the third block is the documents that show how the legal entity is connected to this real estate. If we open, for example, the first document, it is written in Indonesian and in English. I think I'll do it differently now. I'll open this document first, then I'll go back to the next one. What do we see? We see the notarial deed. This is Indonesian legislation, a notarial deed. Here we see the phrase sewa. So, hak sewa refers to the so-called lease rights. This document consists of 16 pages. There's a lot of information, especially since it's written in Indonesian, but I'll explain to you what this document means. According to Indonesian legislation, one cannot own property on real estate. We only have the right to lease real estate. Ownership of land is only held by Indonesian citizens. Since we are a legal entity, we cannot directly own property rights on real estate, only lease rights. Everyone who buys real estate in Indonesia as a foreigner only holds lease rights. That's a fact, and that's just how it is. No other way our lawyers, and not just ours, may come up with different mechanisms, but the essence is that it still has to comply with local legislation, because according to local law, we are only talking about lease rights. In other words, this is where the lease comes in, the lease right on the land where a specific real estate object is located. And we see that it outlines who the notary is. By the way, according to Indonesian legislation, there must be 2 witnesses when signing a notarial lease agreement or any notarial action regarding the acquisition of lease rights, or when transferring lease rights. These should be 2 local citizens who can confirm that, yes, we saw this person sign the lease agreement. That's how it works in Indonesia. Next, we see the person who directly signed the lease agreement. With the owner, we see the company involved, and now I'll show you the real estate object. It's 70 square meters, Unit 5, which indicates that this real estate object is located on this land. Here we have Andrei Fedosov, the person who signed on behalf of Dow LLC. And if you look here, it outlines the parties to the contract, namely Andrei Fedosov, who represents Bali Assets for Dow LLC. So this is the company that is directly leasing the land. And here it is. Binaryx Bali Assets for WLC. This is a company that directly owns the lease, rights to the land plot, and what is built on it. Namely the villa called a loft, Unit 5, with an area of 70 square meters. This document, which is 16 pages long, yes, we can see here, talks exactly about that. In other words, for how much it was purchased, that is, WLC gathered from the investors. All these investors become partners of WLC. WLC went to Indonesia. Let's say this is abstract. They concluded a lease agreement for the land plot because, according to Indonesian law, a foreign company can only lease real estate. After that, on this land plot, there is a property that will be rented out, so that the investors can receive their income from renting the property. This is exactly what this notarized lease agreement for the land plot states. Next, what we have is the compensation agreement. That is, what we looked at, but I didn't explain it right away. This is the contract that states that. We again see 2 parties, Igor Zuk and Andrei Files. That is, those people who directly, on behalf of Dow LLC, you see, Binaryx Bali ACI, that is, Andrei represented. He was the direct representative of Dow LLC. The compensation agreement states that payment was made for this real estate property, namely 2 million rubles, which is the local currency, because in Indonesia, transactions for real estate must be conducted in the local currency. Here, it directly describes the area of the land plot, which is almost how many square meters? 70 square meters for the villa and plus 1865 square meters for the land plot. The address of this property, etc. So we conclude a lease agreement, meaning that what actually happened was the purchase and sale of the real estate property. However, according to Indonesian law, you cannot own real estate directly. Just by signing a purchase agreement, it can only be done through a lease. In other words, we showed the lease agreement, which is notarized because there is an act. In the lease agreement, Igor Zuk is directly mentioned, the person who sold, I would say, and Andrei Fedosov, who is from Bali, and directly purchased the property. And the compensation agreement states that the parties settled their accounts with each other. There are no financial issues. Moving on. After the Dow LLC, that is, the legal entity acquired the property. It then rents it out. In order to rent it out, The investor must understand that there is some kind of contract with the management company. We have a specific one. This is how it is. There is also a property management agreement in English and Balinese, meaning there is a company that has taken on the obligation to manage this property, Bali Invest Management. We see here, yes, PTP, which is the abbreviation for the organizational and legal form of local companies. She discusses in detail about the fact that we essentially have a local company and directly Andrei Fedosov, meaning our property, yes, that is, in essence. Dow LLC, we see Dow LLC here. Yes, Andrei's representative was here. And Bali Invest Management, meaning Denis Ivanov from Bali Invest Management signed. What do we see here? We see in this agreement, the property owner has leased the property and entered into a management contract with a local company, which will directly rent out the property and pay the income. And pay the income. There's something written here. Yes, there's a unified file where it is located. And let's say this income, since the legal entity is a partner. The legal entity receives income and distributes this income among the partners and those people, meaning those who directly bought the token. There is also a statement letter, meaning this is a document that confirms that the management company commits to take over the management of this property. We created this statement letter before the property attracted funds, because, well, you can only rent it out and sign a contract with the management company if there is already ownership or a lease right established for the property. But when, for example, the full 100% of the funds for the legal entity had not yet been raised, there was a statement letter, meaning the management company's commitment that yes, once you gather and purchase, we will sign the contract and manage this property. That's all. So we see these 3 blocks of documents, meaning the documents. Block 1 is the documents that confirm that the token a person bought is directly related to this legal entity, and the legal entity owns the property. We talked about the smart contract that issued these tokens, which each investor acquires. This smart contract is directly outlined in the charter documents of the legal entity registered in the state of Wyoming. The operation agreement, this is. The first block of the operation agreement is a document that explains how the partners manage this legal entity, what rights and obligations they have, and how the income received by this legal entity is distributed, as well as what income can be expected. We also have legal due diligence, meaning the documents for the legal check of the property, before it is tokenized. And all the documents, the third block, are the documents that directly confirm the rights of this legal entity that issued the tokens, which are owned by the partners who bought these tokens, and how this legal entity is connected to the property, which is located, let's say, far away, somewhere in Indonesia. So that's it, basically.